Want to have your own business but don't want to start from scratch? Franchising might be the answer you're looking for. Welcome to the Level Up with Nick Lopez show. The show that brings you thought leaders in business, franchising, and high-performance personal development. Whether you're a buyer, seller, franchisee, franchisor, or a consultant, find everything you need to know about franchising right here. Own a business without the pain and financial losses that come with creating it. Find the time, freedom, and financial independence you can have through entrepreneurship. Learn how franchising can help you get there. Listen up and get ready for another episode of the Level Up with Nick Lopez show.
Welcome to the Level Up show with Nick Lopez, where we level up with thought leaders in franchising, business, and high-performance personal development. Today's guest, I'm absolutely humbled to have on the show. He was the CEO and chairman of Maaco and Driven Brands. He was very instrumental in helping Driven Brands grow from $350 million in system-wide revenue to $920 million in system-wide revenue. He was also the chairman of the International Franchise Association. Ken Walker, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Ken, so you've done so much in franchising. You've given back in so many different ways and have most certainly been a leader in the franchise industry. But, a lot of folks don't necessarily raise their hand and say, yeah, I'm getting into franchising. In fact, franchising is often misunderstood and generally looked at as McDonald's or Burger King, something to that extent. And, the realization that franchising is in all sorts of industries, from home service to auto, which you're very familiar with. And so I'm just curious, Ken, I'd like to know, how did franchising find you?
Well, it goes a long way back. I was doing turnover. I was a CPA by training, had become an operating manager with a company called Big Four Automotive out of Fort Worth. And we kept buying distribution centers, and I figured out how to turn them around. And so I got a chance to take what was then the largest bankruptcy in automotive history out of California, a company by the name of Cardis. And I was lucky enough to go run it while it was in Chapter 11, and it was a public company. So then after 4 years, we had 2 young daughters and 2 sons back in Texas. And my wife said, it's time to get out of California. She could see that it wasn't a great place to raise kids. And so I got recruited to go to Memphis to a company called Parts Inc. that was owned by GKN out of Great Britain. And GKN also, Parts Inc., actually, the company that I was responsible for, owned Maaco and Sparks Tune-Up and was a franchisee of one more, I forget who it was. And after we fixed it and sold it, I said, well, it's time to talk about, what happens to me next. Is there an exit package? They said, we've got this great idea. We've got a problem at Maaco, and would you mind going over there? And so in 1996, I went to Maaco, and what they described to me was a problem. They said, the franchisees think that we have been misusing the advertising fund. And so, but the total amount is like $16 million, and we can handle that out of our, chump change. Well, that $16 million issue ended up in the company losing a lawsuit that got troubled and such, and it ended up being $650 million. The franchisees hated the company, or half the franchisees hated the company. Half the franchisees loved the company. All those two halves hated each other. So it was it was much more a emotional issue than it was a accounting issue that I had been used to fixing. So, and as my view is that people want to like people. And so you just got to put them together to let those things be fixed. And we did that in a couple of ways. We put we had an issue I mentioned to you earlier today about we started raising money for Children's Miracle Network. And that way, even if you're in the half the group that hates the company, you love Children's Miracle Network. There was nothing to dislike about. And those that loved the company were all in as well as the company. And so we started raising money via a charitable trust, I guess, that raised money for Children's Miracle Network, and ultimately put they called it a vertical people mover, which was the elevator at the hospital, the local hospital here in Charlotte, and people liked each other. And then after the lawsuit got reversed, and so the franchisees were taxed with some of the costs associated with it, it became much more easy to settle the lawsuit at that point in time. And we renegotiated a new contract. And I told the franchisees, I said, if we can get this done by Friday, I'll charter us a boat down in the Caribbean and we'll go sailing. And we got the contract finished and took the leaders from each of the halves of the franchisees, put them together on a boat, and some of them were washing dishes together and some of them were raising the sales together, and people being together solved the problems. So, and that was very much a cultural issue. So that's what got me to franchising in the Maaco.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that is an incredible story, Ken. And there are so many different elements there that can be elaborated on. And you just so, directly overviewed in a handful of minutes there that I'm sure was such an amazing journey. But what I love that you mentioned was that at the core of that, it was people and people coming together. And I think you'd mentioned that it was more than an accounting problem, but it was a matter of getting these two sides of the fence, if you will, on the same page, those that were in line with the franchise and those that were not. And what's incredible about that is that it took something beyond any one individual or the company itself to unite them. And it was a cause greater than everybody, that charitable initiative that really aligned everybody. So Ken, I'm just curious, what was, I know you had mentioned that it was really the misuse of funds there, but misuse of advertising dollars.
Really, that was what the claim was, that I think that the lawsuit finally, when it prevailed, showed that was not being done, that there was the issue was that the company had formed its own advertising company that it owned, and it had told the franchisees that it didn't make money on advertising. Well, the advertising company that was owned by two of the previous owners had made some money on it, and they didn't feel fully disclosed. So, truth. I had a great mentor at Maaco, Ted Pierce. Ted and Gene Zest both were VPs there when I got there, and they both taught me franchising, and both of them lived with such integrity. Ted, the attorney, said that sunlight always disinfects the truth, and so you make sure that shed plenty of sunlight on issues, and the truth will come out, and that's where you ultimately want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you were coming from a publicly held company there in Fort Worth, and then coming into a new industry in franchising, and with an organization that had really some serious cultural differences. So two real challenges there to tackle. So I was curious, how was that journey coming to learn about franchising? It is definitely different than a traditional corporate company.
Well, it was made, you live it and you learn it. But my journey was made much easier because of the two gentlemen that I mentioned, Gene Ziss and Ted Pierce. Both of them had been with Maaco for 20 plus years by the time I got there. And they pretty much taught me franchising as we on the fly. I may have been more difficult with our attorney, Ted Pierce, because I kept wanting to do things and he'd kind of shake his head and tell me, no, you can't do that. And he had some great sayings. One of them was you disinfect the truth with the sunlight. And one of them was that no matter how flat that pancake, there's always two sides. So talking about stories. So it's how people want to interpret the stories that define the reality of the situation. And they were great mentors to allow me to learn off of their knowledge. Gene Ziss was the one who, such a huge heart. Gene was sitting at home on a holiday and happened to see the MNN, the Children's Miracle Network, CMN broadcast, and he got up out of his chair on this holiday, went down to the TV studio and volunteered on the spot to answer phones and to help raise money for CMN. And he came back and suggested the idea that maybe that's where we knew that we thought we needed to find a charity to support, to bring the franchise groups together. And Gene found that one and it worked great, that I went roaming about on.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you were pretty much on point there. I was just curious, what that journey of franchising was like. And obviously Gene and Ted had an instrumental complementary role in helping you make that transition. And you said it great in that it was just really living it out and having good peers to help with that learning curve in franchising. But so the Children's Miracle Network became the center of really this divide within Maaco. What was that process like, Ken, taking two sides of the organization that probably didn't speak to each other and were very much different in terms of points of view? That seems to me like a pretty intimidating situation and overwhelming, especially when you're new to the organization. But you were clearly put in that role for a reason, and your skill sets combined with your team ultimately helped bring that organization together, which is an amazing organization in franchising and just the country in general. But so Ken, what was that process like?
Well, it was really pretty easy because we weren't focusing. We didn't tell the world. We didn't tell ourselves really that we were focusing on bringing everybody together. Although that was clearly one of the benefits. Well, we knew that we needed to get everybody pulling in the same direction, and we either had to pull against a competitor or we had to pull for something, and we chose to pull for something. And it was really easy because it was something that franchisees, irrespective of whether they believed or didn't believe the company, they believed in this mission. And some of the strongest advocates for the company and some of the strongest against the company were all for pulling the taking care of kids. How do you not love giving money to kids that need it, or medical attention? And it was something that was just a lot bigger than our issues were.
And so it doesn't sound like the franchise owners were struggling to be successful. It sounds like they were at Maaco. They were there to stay. They were frustrated about really the use of those funds, and so by being able to raise funds as an organization for CMN, that ultimately gave a unified cause beyond any one person or opinion. And okay, so you eventually took Maaco with your team and created a holdings company in Driven Brands. Driven Brands is an amazing holding company and franchising, really in any industry. And so, my goodness, when I knew that you were coming on the show today, I was very much looking forward to hearing from you how that process came about, and really the formation of Driven Brands, the story behind it. Ken, if you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience, that'd be great.
I'd be glad to. It was a pretty easy decision. Because of the lawsuit, we were having to put monies up to sell franchises, make selling franchises very difficult. So we decided that we could grow, and we were either going to build more franchises ourselves. Our franchisees were successful. They got back what they put into it emotionally, and great people that worked hard and made money. So we were either going to open a bunch of those ourselves, or we were going to have to buy something else to continue to grow. And so that was when I started looking at franchises to buy. And as you said, we bought Econolube first. And when we were buying Econolube, it just felt bad to have Maaco own Econolube. It made them sound like a second-class citizen. So we had another company that called Maaco Holding Company that actually owned Maaco. And all we did was change the name of it from Maaco Holding Company to Driven Brands, which was one of our accounting, I guess he was our controller, came up with, and 4 or 5 of the managers and came to it and knew that we were looking for a name. It's amazing if you'll trust your team. I'll tell you a quick story. 20 years before that, I was in California, and we listed all this company was in Chapter 11. And so we listed all the problems that this company had and what we'd like to do. And we forced vote, ranked them. And one of the issues was we had a union in two of our facilities out there in Sacramento and in California and in Oakland. And one of the managers came to me one day and said, well, you can check number 16 off your list. I wasn't focused on 16. I didn't know what 16 was. And it was vote out the unions. And I said, well, how'd that happen? He said, well, you said you wanted it done. So I went up there and told them, and they said, okay. And they voted it out. And so that's what I mean about trust your people. That gentleman, Dave Holland, left when he left California. He went with me to Memphis, and then he came to Charlotte. So he's one of these guys you just trust. He'll get something done for you. Just tell him what it is you want done and get out of the way. And he did it. So the same thing happened. What did you ask me about? Because that was what prompted the reply. Anyway.
Yeah, your team had ultimately come up with the name Driven Brands as a
oh yeah. So they knew we were looking for a name, and so the 4 or 5 or 6 of them over lunch came up with the idea and presented it to me, and sounded like a good use. I mean, we couldn't have paid somebody more to find that kind of a name, and it worked real well. And as luck had, we used that name and we bought Econolube first, then we bought Aerocolors and AutoQual and Driving Style that were cosmetic type of franchises, automotive. Our plan was to be just automotive in the franchised world, and we said non-competitive. And the reason Econolube, although they were doing much of the same issues that Maaco was, they were in California, and we just didn't have much at all in California. So out of 800 or 900 franchises, we maybe had 12 in California before we bought Econolube and got another 50 or something. And then we bought Maaco. And it was through these acquisitions that we primarily grew. We went from the 350 to the over 900, nearly $1 billion. And it was specifically through buying other franchises. Well, and normal growth inside the organization. So number of franchises that you had.
And so I would assume that has some accounting implications, some financial implications, bringing these entities together. Was that your predominant skill set that you brought to the team?
Well, I'm not sure I brought it, but it was there because our accounting and sales organization and just did a wonderful job of figuring out what they were doing and moving it. There was a lot of cost implications, and there were financing and financial implications. But our controller at the time, or our CFO at the time, Mike Carlett, did just a good job of figuring out the problems. He and Mark Street, who had been with us forever. Mark was the original CFO and hired Mike, and Mark took on one of the other. I think he did everything at some point in time in the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to love those team players. And so clearly,
and Mark is especially one because he was started as the CFO for me in Memphis. We were, as I said, we were owned by a British firm, and Mark was British, and so they liked to send over people. And Mark was just a great young guy, and he took the CFO role when I came to Maaco. He came with me shortly thereafter, and he ended up serving as the VP of information technology, but he also served as the VP of sales at one point. I don't think he was ever the VP of operations, but just a great young man that probably wouldn't appreciate the term young man anymore. He's not as old as I am, but he's probably in his 60s by now.
Yeah, but clearly just a tremendous team player with a lot of skills, and I'm sure great people skills at the center of that. And yep. Ken, that's really what's standing out to me about yourself is your ability to bring teams together, bring people together, really appreciate their skill sets and empower them to level up the organization in their unique way, obviously with keeping the team in mind and the organization in mind, but empowering your trusted teammates to get the job done. So, Ken, what is your background? I know that you've served as CEO in several organizations, but where are your core skills? Where does that come from?
That's really a good question. I was a CPA and worked as a CPA in Fort Worth for 6 years before I started into the real business of the world. I had a great mentor in Fort Worth at Big Four, who his day consisted of getting up and walking around the warehouse and to the office and shaking hands with everybody and knowing everybody. And he knew whose daughter was sick or whose mother or dad was sick. And he just cared about his people. And that was as genuine as it could be. That's just who the man was. So, I think that was probably one of the first mentors I ever had that I learned something completely different from, because I was a very numbers driven, this is the line to take and follow it and, do these things. We had a warehouse when I was there in Lubbock, and just blind luck, they said we wanted to turn it around, and it was losing money, and our Fort Worth warehouse was just killing it, making money, and had for a number of years. So I took the two sets of financials and laid them on a piece of paper side by side. And I said, well, look, there's only 2 or 3 numbers that are different. The gross margin is lower there, and the payroll cost is higher as a percent of sales. So all we got to do is raise the price and right size the organization. And so I did that. And what I didn't understand was half the customers left because the price had gone up. And so I said, well, look, there's good news and bad news here. When I lay the financials side by side, the gross margin's now in line, even though it's at a smaller level. All we got to do is right size again the number of people. And we did. And then something happened that I wasn't expecting. All those customers that had left came back because they liked the service that they were getting. And so I had to go out and hire a bunch of people to replace the ones that we had right sized. And it became made a whole career out of just doing that kind of thing from that point forward. So I was an
accounting. Okay. Yeah. CPA. And so you're bringing these organizations together as you were acquiring them with this new entity and Driven Brands. Clearly, a fundamental element of that was understanding the books and the P&L and finding opportunities to close gaps and level up that organization through the numbers. I'm making an assumption there, but I would assume that was a fundamental element of bringing the Driven Brand organizations together and ultimately growing from $350 million to almost $1 billion in system-wide revenue. What were those elements that created that growth? I think we've hit on a couple here. Obviously, your ability to bring a team together and really trust them, and with some mentors, obviously learn a couple things about the power of people and it being beyond yourself. But even the nuanced details of who is sick, of members on your team. I mean, that's an incredible leadership there, and I can only imagine from an employee standpoint how much that means. Not every organization leads that way. So I can see that is clearly a staple in creating a team to be able to take on that sort of growth. And then you add in the ability to look at balance sheets and financials to find opportunities. What were some other elements, Ken, that allowed you to make those acquisitions and nearly grow to $1 billion in revenue?
Well, I did understand the financials, and I understood that if I put two companies together, it really was a case where 1 and 1 might equal maybe not 3, but 2.5. And I knew where to look for the economic changes. When we bought one of the companies, I remember the number of people they had per franchise in the corporate group was way different and than what Maaco was, way higher. And so I thought that I could probably match that, but they had a different role within the organization, and I ended up not changing that one. But we did always have the CEO and the CFO and the high level we typically would be able to take out because we could handle more within the Driven Brands group and take those out, and that raised the value. One of them, we took like $1 million of cost out in less than a year. And, those things make up the difference. And so it worked just fine. The other thing was I had a friend that pointed out that franchising is one of those businesses that is typically very cash rich. So if you say you made $1 million, you got $1 million of real cash. Maybe, I teased that the most expensive asset in our company was my desk, and it was worth probably $500. But you just don't have to spend a lot of money as the franchisor on fixed assets. You're always doing it on live assets and finding ways to help the franchisee be more successful, but you don't have it in fixed assets. So if you said you made $1 million, you typically had $1 million of cash or close there too. And that was a real business advantage, because you take somebody that's in the oil drilling business, they may think they made $1 million, but they had to spend $400,000 sticking that hole in the ground and building the infrastructure around it. So franchising lets the money flow to the top real quick.
It's just pretty streamlined, and clearly that is only going to make for healthy books and healthy growth to ultimately support franchise owners. On that point, Ken, when you take an organization and acquire them into your holdco, what are some of those fundamental elements that you look at in that organization to say, all right, we need to level up this organization by XYZ in order to get it up to par with our standards at Driven? What were some of those fundamental elements that you leaned on when making that acquisition and welcoming a new brand into Driven Brands?
Well, technology is always one of the issues, because it seems to me that a franchisor is supposed to be adding value to that, the value chain of a franchise. The real heart and blood, the blood of is the franchisees that's running through the system, actually doing all the work at the consumer level. And the franchisor's role is to get customers in the door, either through advertising or the brand, or advertising the brand, something. But technology is always one of those things you can differentiate yourself from your competitors. Let's take the automotive business. So there are probably 250,000 places you can get your car fixed in the United States. And when you take Maaco and Maaco and the big brands, and add them all together, you maybe get 5,000, 8,000 units. I don't know what the numbers are today specifically. So it's a lot of mom and pop, small people that you're competing with. Well, what can you do differently or better than anybody else? Well, it ought to be technology. So that was one of the first things that we worried about, was how do we improve the technology? But there was always, an element of cost reduction, because I was good at doing you put two numbers together, a 5 on one side and a 4 on the other. I nearly will always tell you that 5 is bigger than 4. I figured that out. And so you just lay the financials down and you figure out where the gaps are, where they may be, and wherever there was a big gap, I would go in and try to figure out why that number was bigger than the other one. And it might be like in Maaco, where they were doing a lot more for the franchisees, but were charging a higher royalty as a result. And so you don't want to change something just because the numbers are bigger. You want to get into the detail and understand it. And I guess the financial background helped me do that.
Yeah, obviously looking at the financials is the scoreboard, and that's the objective measure that, gets beyond the human opinion. And as a franchise owner in particular, your head's down in your business, you're probably not that objective about your performance, right? It's pretty biased because you're working your tail off, and of course everything is as good as possible, but really being humble and being able to truly look at the reality of the situation, which is the scoreboard there in a business, the financials, or in this case, looking at an entire organization, that those financials are really going to show downsides or opportunities depending on how you look at it. And obviously you tackle them as opportunities, Ken. So, from an engagement standpoint, right? I think we've talked about a lot of things: your leadership, your team's leadership, the importance of the financials and opportunities there, technology. I would love to hear from you, Ken. What were some of the practical approaches that you took to help with engagement? Because as you said it, right, system-wide, from the franchisor standpoint, really getting in front of customers is the franchisor's responsibility, and the franchisees is to really deliver that brand experience. And so that requires engagement and commitment to whatever way of doing business, whether it's Meineke or Maaco. So what were some of those practical approaches that you took with keeping engagement top of mind and helping keep franchise owners aligned with the way that the organization did business?
Well, we had councils, franchisee councils, and they weren't just for show. I genuinely trusted and believed those guys. One of the requirements within Meineke and then ultimately Maaco and the others was that they had to send in their financials every year. And if Meineke as a whole was having a problem, but I had some outliers that were doing well, I'd try to figure out why they were doing well and then take that information and share it with the rest of the franchisees. And you look so smart and you're not doing anything but taking what somebody else has already figured out and leveraging it against the whole of the franchise. That's, I think, the biggest advantage that a franchisor has, is that he can see the ups and the downs within his organization and give them to the ones that not everybody wants to get better, Nick. Some guys just want to deal with what they're dealing with and aren't looking to grow it or expand it. And that's okay. That's fits their lifestyle and it's their decision. They've got the money and the energy into it. But having a council that you really trust and rely on is important. I'll tell you one other story. I mentioned that I took the group on a big boat into the Caribbean to try to put the two sides back together. But one of the things I found out was on those trips, they will tell you you're together night and day for, 5-6 days. And they would tell you everything that was going on in their business. And so we used that as the start of our strategic planning each year. So I would listen to them and I'd say, you got to give me 100 ideas before you get off this boat of how we can make this company better. And goodness gracious, they would work their tails off. We would sail from port to port during the day. And during those time frames, we'd have a big table outside and be taking notes. And I'd get 100 from 2 or 3 different groups a year doing that. Then we'd work them into our strategic plan, at least the best of those ideas, because not every idea it's an idea, but it may not be the one that you can afford to effectuate at that point in time. So you can only afford to do the top items each year. And so we would work on those top items and put them into our strategic plan, our business plan for the upcoming year. And somebody would be responsible for them, and I'd report back to the group the next year. And that kept them engaged. I went on that boat trip a couple of times after I quit doing it with franchisees, and it isn't near as much fun as just a group whose sole focus is making it's to have fun. But in the meantime, there's a way to make the company a better place, and the brand a better brand, and the franchisees make more money, and all of those things are the right thing to be doing as a franchisor.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that, Ken. Just so much wisdom and impactful insight there. Clearly that feedback and innovation is coming from the franchise owners, and being willing, again, humility as an organization, being willing to hear out those franchise partners that are in, day out in the business and truly understand how to make it better. I love that you said that really kicked off the strategic planning that you would do year in, year out. So, it got me thinking about something that is becoming more of a trend. You mentioned different councils, right? And hearing input from those councils, and it's a franchise advisory council, but more and more there's a trend of franchise associations growing within the franchise industry. I'm curious your thoughts on, is that an effective way to gain counsel from franchise owners? And, this growing trend of franchise associations, I think they can have some negative implications if they're started for, some issues within the franchise. But if a franchise association started with goodwill and truly to make the organization better, what are your thoughts around franchise associations and franchise councils?
Exactly what you said, is they can make it better, and it depends on what their intent is. If it's just to gain power, it's a bad situation. Within our organization, Maaco had a strong council and a strong association, and Maaco had none. And we took both groups individually onto the boat, and both groups worked fine. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish with the association. So I don't think I can give you a one-size-fits-all answer. It really is it's another group to manage or to encompass, I guess, as opposed to manage in some fashions. And you've got to figure out how best to do that based on what you know about that organization and those individual people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but again, it's about the people and ultimately working collectively to make the business better.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. As long as people's hearts are pure, then nearly anything will work. Mm. But so often people have other agendas, and that's okay if you figure them out. If you're running the organization and you figure out what those other agendas are, that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You said it so well there. It's about individuals having their hearts, being pure and the right intent there, which is ultimately the organization and making the company better. So Ken, I feel like I could talk to you all day about so many different topics, but I'm curious, Ken, why do you love franchising so much?
Because it works. Here's what I've figured out is that there is no way I, as an individual, could put somebody into a franchise in Seattle, Washington that cared as much because I cared in Charlotte. That wouldn't translate. But if I put a franchisee there, he's doing it for his own personal reasons, and it works. There's different levels of organization, and if you have a business that can just make money hand over fist, maybe like the Apple stores, then it's okay to have just company owned. But if it's one that takes effort and work and thought at the franchisee level, then you better have somebody that's worrying about it and at that level as much as you are at the corporate level.
Well said. And clearly, the consumer is getting a great product because of that dynamic that you just explained. And I couldn't agree more. Ken, it's really been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show today. I've most certainly leveled up. I'm sure those that are watching have as well. So Ken, thank you for being on the show.
That's my pleasure.
If anybody is interested, Ken, in getting in touch with you or learning more about you, how can they do that?
Go through you. You've got all the info. I'm not looking for anything else. I've already made my mistakes. You know, it's funny that it's the mistakes you make that you learn from, I guess. And heaven knows I've made enough of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and through that, Ken, you've certainly made a tremendous impact in franchising, and I am incredibly grateful for your leadership and everything you've done with the International Franchise Association and Driven Brands. Myself personally, I actually work with folks that used to be at Driven Brands, and so I could personally tell you that I have been impacted by your story and your journey, what you shared with us today. I truly am grateful for you, as I know many others are. Andy Fuller, the founder of Mosquito Hunters, who was gracious enough to help you get on our show today. I know he most certainly is, and is just one testament of many individuals that have been impacted by your wisdom, which, as you said, has really come from a career of mistakes and learning. So if you have also been inspired, leveled up, and learned from this conversation, please give this video a like. Most certainly subscribe to our channel. That's how we can continue to grow and share information to help others level up. But most importantly, please drop a comment down below, contribute to this conversation, give us your thoughts on all the different talking points and themes, the wisdom that Ken shared today. And as always, level up.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Level Up with Nick Lopez show. Remember, it's never too late to get started on your entrepreneurial journey. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you enjoyed today's segment. Catch us again next week and visit limepainting.com for more of the Level Up with Nick Lopez show.